The Vorthik fleet hung in the void like a constellation of death, 700 vessels strong, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with the rhythm of alien hearts. Admiral Korvix-9 studied the tactical display with satisfaction, watching the final preparations for the quarantine barrier's activation around Sol System. After 300 years of debate in the Galactic Council, humanity's homeworld would finally be sealed away forever. Signal from the Council flagship, reported his communications officer, tentacles dancing across the neural interface. The Hegemarch wishes to confirm the human population count, 12,200,000,000 souls. Korvix-9 replied, his voice carrying the weight of genocide, all contained within their single world. The plague spreaders will trouble the galaxy no more. The humans had been magnificent in their brief expansion period, only 4 to 7 years. From their first stumbling steps beyond their atmosphere to establishing colonies on 17 worlds, they possessed an unnerving adaptability that had both fascinated and terrified the established galactic powers. Where other species required centuries of genetic modification to survive on new worlds, humans simply endured. They thrived in toxic atmospheres, withstood radiation that would kill most sentients, and worst of all, they bred like a virus. But it was their wars that had sealed their fate. The recordings from the human colonial wars still haunted the Council's archives. Entire fleets reduced to expanding plasma clouds, worlds glassed from orbit over minor trade disputes, and civilians weaponized with a casual brutality that made even the war-hardened Krillian Empire recoil in horror. When the humans had turned their weapons on each other during the Martian succession crisis, the galaxy had watched in fascinated revulsion as they deployed singularity bombs. In their own star system, they called it acceptable losses. Korvix-9 muttered, remembering the intelligence reports, 7 million dead in a single engagement, and their leaders spoke of it as if discussing crop yields. The quarantine barrier began to materialize, a lattice of exotic matter and folded space-time that would make the Sol System unreachable from hyperspace. Ships within the barrier could still travel to other star systems, but nothing could enter. The humans would be trapped forever with their violence, left to burn themselves out in isolation. Sir, the sensor officer's voice carried an edge of concern. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the inner system. The humans appear to be building something. Korvix-9's primary eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. Vast construction projects orbited Earth, Jupiter, and Saturn. The energy output was staggering, equivalent to the industrial capacity of 8 dozen core worlds combined. How long have they been at this? Approximately 50 years, sir, since the Council first announced the quarantine decision. The Admiral's blood chilled. 50 years of preparation. 50 years of a species that had gone from wooden sailing ships to faster-than-light travel. In less than 2 centuries, what had they built in that time? Status of the barrier, 73% complete. Full activation in 6 hours. On the display, new signatures appeared around Earth's moon. Massive structures that hadn't been there moments before, emerging from hidden construction bays like sleeping predators awakening. Whatever the humans had been building, they were revealing it now. Admiral, the communications officer's voice trembled. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. Audio only. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. This is Hierarch Vash Kellern of the Terran War Council. You have 6 hours to withdraw your fleet from Sol space. This is your only warning. Korvix-9 laughed. A sound like breaking glass, replied with standard protocol. Inform them that the quarantine is irrevocable and they are to stand down all military assets. The response came immediately. We are not the same species you quarantined, alien. You gave us 50 years to prepare. We used them well. The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in silence. On the tactical display, more structures continued to emerge from concealment. Throughout the system, whatever the humans had become in their forced isolation, they were about to make their statement to the galaxy. The first human ship to emerge from Earth's shadow was nothing like the vessels in the Galactic Council's databases, where human ships had once been angular, utilitarian constructs of metal and ceramic. This behemoth was a living nightmare of biomechanical fusion. Organic curves blended seamlessly with crystalline structures that pulsed with malevolent energy, and weapon ports that looked disturbingly like mouths lined its hull. Classification. Korvix-9 demanded, his earlier confidence evaporating. Unknown, sir. It's It's 3 kilometers long and radiating energy patterns we've never encountered. The hull appears to be partially organic, possibly grown rather than built. The human vessel, if it could still be called that, began to move with fluid grace. That belied its massive size. It wasn't following ballistic trajectories or using conventional propulsion. Instead, it seemed to fold space around itself, sliding through dimensions like a knife through flesh. Sir, proximity alarms. It's accelerating directly toward our forward picket line. Captain Thylax 7 commanded the destroyer Righteous Talent, part of the screening force positioned at the system's edge. She watched in growing alarm as the human vessel approached at impossible speed, her tactical computer struggling to track its erratic movement patterns. All ships, assumed defensive formation Kappa 7, prepared to demonstrate galactic superiority. The first salvo came from 12 destroyers simultaneously, particle beams and plasma torpedoes that could reduce a small moon to constituent atoms. The weapon struck the human ship's hull and simply disappeared, not absorbed or deflected, but consumed as if the vessel were feeding on the energy. Impossible, Thylax 7 whispered. All weapons, maximum yield. Bring that thing down. The human ship's response was immediate and terrifying. Sections of its hull opened like flowering petals, revealing weapon systems that defied physics. Streams of what could only be described as weaponized space-time erupted from the orifices, twisting reality around the Vortex ships. The destroyer Eternal Vigilance was the first to die. The human weapon struck its bow, and the ship simply folded, not exploded or vaporized, but collapsed in on itself as if three-dimensional space had suddenly become a suggestion. The screams of its crew echoed across the communication channels for a heartbeat. Before cutting off entirely, fall back, all ships, emergency retreat. But the human vessel was already among them, moving with predatory grace. Another weapon fired this, one resembling a bolt of pure entropy. It struck the cruiser Divine Retribution amidships, and the ship began to age rapidly, centuries of decay compressed into seconds. Hull plates rusting away, crew members withering to dust in their command chairs. Report, Corvix 9's voice crackled across the fleet channels. We've lost 4 ships in the first engagement, sir. The human vessel appears to be using weapons based on temporal manipulation and dimensional folding. Our shields are completely ineffective. The human ship has stopped moving, hovering like a bloated spider among the wreckage of the Vortex screening force. Then it began to transmit on all frequencies, its message reaching every ship in the quarantine fleet. You wanted to cage us. The voice was different now, layered with harmonics that suggested multiple speakers talking in perfect unison. You thought you understood what we were. But isolation is evolution's greatest catalyst. We are no longer the species you feared. We are what you made us become. A new contact appeared on the sensors, then another, and another. Ships were emerging from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Each one was unique, a fusion of technologies that shouldn't exist. Some appeared to be constructed from dark matter given form. Others pulsed with the rhythm of dying stars. Count, Corvix 9 asked, his voice barely a whisper. 137 vessels detected so far, sir, and they're still coming. The first human ship began to move again, but this time it wasn't alone. The growing fleet arranged itself in a formation that looked disturbingly organic, like antibodies responding to an infection. At the center of the formation, something massive was emerging from Earth's shadow, a structure so vast it dwarfed entire moons. Sir, the sensor officer's voice cracked with terror. That's not a ship. It's a mobile star. They've somehow weaponized their sun. The human transmission resumed, and this time Corvix 9 could hear the smile in the alien voice. You have 4 hours to complete your withdrawal. After that, we begin teaching the galaxy what 50 years of enforced evolution can accomplish. The emergency council session convened aboard the Hegemark's flagship as reports flooded in from across the Sol system. What the humans had accomplished in their isolation defied every principle of galactic science and evolution. They hadn't just adapted, they had transcended. The orbital structures around Jupiter appeared to be processing plants, reported Admiral Corvix 9, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. They're converting the planet's mass into exotic matter at a rate that should be impossible by our calculations. They have harvested approximately 12% of the gas giant's total mass. Hegemark Volcara Prime, eldest of the Ethereal Council, studied the holographic displays with growing unease. Her species had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, but what she was seeing now challenged everything she understood about the limitations of matter and energy, and Saturn, she asked, completely encased in a Dyson construct. They're not just harvesting solar energy, they're manipulating stellar fusion itself. The energy output rivals that of a neutron star. Through the flagship's observation dome, the human fleet was clearly visible now. 193 vessels of impossible design, each one a fusion of organic and synthetic technologies that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. They moved in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. Biological analysis suggests the humans have undergone extensive genetic modification, continued the science officer. What we're detecting isn't entirely human anymore. The DNA signatures show integration with at least 17 different galactic species, plus synthetic components that don't match any known technology. The Hegemark's tentacles writhe with agitation. They've been harvesting our genetic material. More than that, ma'am. Intelligence suggests they've been studying every piece of galactic technology they could access. Trade vessels, diplomatic missions, even debris from ancient battlefields. They've had 50 years to reverse engineer and improve. Upon our combined scientific knowledge, a new alarm sounded as the tactical display updated. The massive structure at the fleet center had fully emerged from Earth's shadow, and its true nature was now apparent. It wasn't a weaponized star, it was something far worse. Dear ancestors, Corvix 9 breathed. They built a mobile black hole generator. The device was beautiful in its terrifying elegance. A crystalline construct the size of a small moon that bent light around itself. In impossible geometries, energy signatures suggested it could create and control gravitational singularities at will, weaponizing the fundamental forces of the universe. Sir, the communications officer's voice trembled. The humans are requesting direct communication with the Hegemark. The main display flickered to life, revealing a figure that had once been human. Hierarch Vash Kellen still possessed recognizably human features, but they were enhanced with technologies that made the Hegemark cybernetic implants look primitive. Neural interfaces pulsed along his skull. His eyes had been replaced with devices that seemed to see through multiple dimensions simultaneously, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that suggested direct neural connection to the fleet's collective consciousness. Hegemark, Kellen said, his tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. I offer you one final chance to withdraw. Take your fleet and leave Sol space immediately. You cannot threaten the Galactic Council, Volcara Prime replied, though her voice lacked conviction. We represent 4,000 species in 10,000 worlds. Kellen's modified features twisted into something that might have been a smile. And we represent the species you tried to exterminate. The species you forced to evolve beyond your comprehension. Observe. The display switched to show one of Saturn's moons tighten. If the archives were correct, as they watched, the moon simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized, but edited out of reality as if it had never been. The gravitational effects rippled outward, causing minor orbital adjustments throughout the Saturnian system. We call it the erasure protocol. Kellen continued conversationally. Reality editing at the quantum level. We can remove matter from existence by severing its connections to the fundamental forces. Your ships, your worlds, your entire species. We can simply decide you never existed. The Hegemark's ancient hearts stuttered in their chest casings. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would indeed be impossible for any single species, Kellen agreed. But we are no longer a single species. We are what you made us, a fusion of everything the galaxy had to offer. Refined through 50 years of evolutionary pressure, we are what you feared we might become. And we are so much more. The human fleet began to move, accelerating toward the quarantine barrier with fluid grace. Each ship bristled with weapons that violated known physics, and at their center, the black hole generator pulsed with barely contained power. 2 hours, Kellen said simply. Then we demonstrate what happens when you cage a species that refuses to be contained. The Galactic Council fleet had faced extinction scenarios before. The Andromedan incursion, the Void Plague, the synthetic uprising, each had been met with overwhelming force and strategic brilliance, honed over millennia. But Hegemark Volcara Prime found herself confronting something entirely new, an enemy that had evolved beyond the rules of engagement. All battle groups, assume Omega formation, she commanded. Deploy gravitic mines at maximum density. If they want to reach the barrier, they'll have to go through hell itself. 700 ships moved with practiced precision. creating overlapping fields of destruction that could sterilize entire star systems. Weapons platforms extended from their hulls, like mechanical flowers, each one capable of channeling the power of small suns. The space between the human fleet and the quarantine barrier became a maze of death. But the humans came anyway. The first wave struck like a living nightmare. 23 vessels that defied classification, their hulls rippling, with biomechanical adaptations that seemed to shift based on the threats they faced. When the gravitic mines detonated, reality twisted around the human ships like water around stones. The weapons that should have crushed them to neutronium density simply slid off. Impossible. Admiral Corvix 9 muttered, watching his carefully. Planned defensive grid proved useless. They're manipulating local space-time to negate gravitational effects. The human response was swift and merciless. Weapons that looked like organic growths fired streams of pure entropy, aging the Vortex ships to scrap in seconds. Other vessels deployed what can only be called probability weapons beams that altered the likelihood of molecular bonds holding. Together, ships simply fell apart as their atomic structure became statistically unlikely. The heavy cruiser Eternal Glory was the first major casualty. A human vessel that resembled a crystalline flower fired a beam of crystallized time, and the cruiser's crew aged 70 years in an instant. Bridge officers collapsed at their stations, their bodies withering as decades compressed into heartbeats. The ship itself began to show signs of temporal decay. HULL plates corroding as if exposed to centuries of space weather. All ships, maximum yield. Corvix 9 commanded. Focus fire on the lead vessel. 3 battle groups responded simultaneously, their combined firepower capable of cracking a planet. Antimatter warheads, quantum disruptors, and stellar compression beams converged on a single human ship, a nightmarish construct that looked like a mechanical shark crossed with a neural network. The weapons struck and were absorbed, not deflected or blocked, but consumed as if the ship were feeding on the energy. Then it began to grow. By the ancestors, the sensor officer whispered, "It's using our weapons as raw material." The ship is physically expanding. The transformed vessel had grown by nearly 30%, new weapon systems blooming from its hull like cancerous growths. When it fired, the beam that emerged was a concentrated burst of every weapon that had struck it, amplified and refined into something far more lethal. The battle group flagship Righteous Vengeance took the brunt of the attack. The beam struck its forward shields and began converting them into exotic matter, the defensive systems becoming ammunition for weapons that turned the ship's own armor into projectiles. Captain Thylex 7 had enough time to scream a warning before her bridge was consumed by weapons that fed on the very atoms of her ship. "We're losing the engagement," Corvix 9 reported, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They're not just defeating us, they're learning from every exchange. Each time we attack, they adapt. Each time they respond, their weapons become more effective." The human fleet had reached the main battle line now, and what followed was less a battle than a demonstration of evolutionary superiority. Human ships moved through the galactic fleet like antibodies through an infection, their weapons systems adapting in real time to counter every defensive measure. The destroyer's sharp blade tried to ram one of the smaller human vessels, its captain choosing death over defeat. The human ship's hull simply flowed around the destroyer like liquid metal, enveloping it completely. The Vortha crew had time to send one final transmission screams of horror as they were assimilated into the ship's biological systems, their knowledge and experience absorbed to fuel the vessel's continued evolution. "Sir," the communications officer's voice cracked with terror, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. They want to thank us." The display filled with Hierarch Kellen's modified features, and when he spoke, his voice carried the harmonics of the absorbed crew members. "Your tactical knowledge is proving invaluable. Every ship you lose makes us stronger. Every strategy you employ teaches us new forms of warfare. Please, continue your resistance. We are learning so much." Around the flagship, the battle had become a rout. Human vessels hunted down fleeing ships like predators playing with wounded prey, their weapons systems becoming more creative with each engagement. One ship fired beams that induced madness, causing enemy crews to turn on each other. Another deployed weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, striking targets that were technically in different realities. "Hegemark," Corvix 9's voice was barely a whisper, "we need to consider full withdrawal. We've lost over 300 ships, and they're still coming." But as he spoke, the massive structure at the center of the human fleet began to power. Up, the black hole generator pulsed with barely contained energy, and space itself began to warp around it. No, Kellen's voice echoed across all frequencies. You wanted to cage us. Now you'll learn what happens when the caged predator breaks. Free. The black hole generator achieved full power with a sound that existed in dimensions beyond human perception, a harmonic that made the vacuum of space itself scream. Reality bent around the device as it created not one, but dozens of micro-singularities, each one precisely controlled and directed like bullets fired from the barrel of physics itself. All ships, emergency scatter, Hegemark Volcara Prime commanded. But her words were lost in the chaos as the first wave of singularities struck the galactic fleet's center formation. The battlecruiser Infinite Wisdom was caught in the gravitational lens of three converging black holes. The ship's hull began to stretch like taffy, its crew experiencing spaghettification as different parts of their bodies fell toward the singularities at different rates. Captain Morvix managed to send one final transmission before his ship was compressed into a ribbon of exotic matter. They're not just using black holes as weapons, they're sculpting them into surgical instruments, Admiral Corvix 9 watched in horror as his carefully coordinated fleet dissolved into chaos. The humans weren't simply overwhelming them with superior firepower. They were demonstrating casual mastery over forces that the Galactic Council considered theoretical impossibilities. A human vessel that resembled a metallic jellyfish deployed what could only be called a time dilation field. Everything within a 5-kilometer radius began to experience accelerated entropy, aging millions of years and seconds. The heavy cruiser Golden Eternity found itself at the field's edge, half the ship existing in normal time, while the other half crumbled to dust. As eons passed in heartbeats, "Sir," the tactical officer's voice carried the hollow tone of a man witnessing the impossible. "They're not just using our science against us. They're using science that shouldn't exist. Those weapons violate causality itself." The human fleet had arranged itself into a formation that resembled a neural network, each ship connected to the others by streams of exotic matter that pulsed. With information transfer, they moved as a single organism, anticipating the galactic fleet's maneuvers before they were executed. 3 Vorthic battle groups attempted a coordinated assault on the human fleet's left flank, their commanders hoping to exploit what appeared to be a gap in the formation. Instead, they flew directly into a trap that had been prepared centuries in advance. The space around them suddenly filled with weapons platforms that materialized from folded dimensions, each one crewed by beings that had once been the human colonists on 17 different worlds. They didn't abandon their colonies, Corvix 9 realized with mounting horror. They evacuated them. Every human in the galaxy has been brought back to Sol System and modified. The battle platforms opened fire with weapons that defied classification. Beams of crystallized gravity pulled ships apart at the molecular level. Projectiles that existed in a state of quantum superposition struck multiple targets simultaneously. Energy weapons that traveled backward through time hit their targets before they were fired. The destroyer Swift Retribution experienced the full horror of temporal weaponry. When it was struck by a causality bomb, the ship began to experience its own destruction in reverse, watching as its hull unexploded while its crew died before the weapon that would kill them had been fired. The psychological impact on the survivors was devastating. They went mad watching their own deaths played in reverse. But the humans' most terrifying weapon wasn't technological, it was biological. Ship after ship reported that their organic crew members were beginning to change, their DNA rewriting itself in response to signals broadcast by the human fleet. Vorthic warriors found their nervous systems growing new connections, their brains expanding to accommodate concepts that no evolved mind should be able to grasp. "They're not trying to kill us," the science officer reported, his voice distorted by vocal cords that were reshaping themselves. "They're trying to convert us, to add us to their collective." Captain Thylex 7, commanding the survivors of the screening force, found herself fighting a war on two fronts. Her ship's weapons were proving ineffective against human technology, while her own crew was slowly being transformed into something that was no longer entirely Vorthic. "Sir," her tactical officer spoke with a voice that now carried harmonics that hadn't existed an hour earlier. "I can see their strategy now. It's beautiful. They're not just conquering us, they're incorporating us. Every species they defeat becomes part of their collective intelligence." Thylex 7 put a plasma bolt through her officer's skull before he could complete his transformation. but she could feel the changes beginning in her own nervous system. Knowledge that wasn't hers was flowing into her consciousness, human memories, alien sciences, technologies that existed beyond the boundaries of known physics. The main battle line was collapsing now. Galactic ships breaking formation as their crews either died or underwent forced evolution. The human fleet pressed forward with relentless efficiency, their weapons becoming more sophisticated with each engagement as they absorbed and integrated the tactical knowledge of their enemies. Fleet casualties at 73%, Corvix 9 reported, his voice mechanically calm despite the horror surrounding him. We have 189 ships remaining, and they're still coming. The black hole generator fired again, this time creating a gravitational wave that propagated through local space-time, like a tsunami of distorted reality. Ships caught in the wave found themselves experiencing impossible accelerations. Their crews pressed against bulkheads by forces that changed direction without warning. Sir, the communications officer's voice had acquired the harmonic overtones that marked the beginning of transformation. The humans are broadcasting again. They're offering us a choice. Hierarch Kellen's image filled the display, but he was no longer alone. Beside him stood figures that had once been members of a dozen different galactic species, all of them enhanced with the same biomechanical modifications that had transformed the humans. Join us, Kellen said simply. Become part of something greater than the sum of your individual limitations, or die as primitives who refused evolution. Hegemark Volcara Prime stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the tactical display show the systematic destruction of everything she had spent 3 millennia building. The Galactic Council fleet was down to 87 functional ships, and those were falling every minute around her. Crew members were fighting a desperate battle against their own biology. As human conversion signals rewrote their genetic code, Admiral Corvix 9's voice carried the hollow tone of absolute defeat. I'm receiving surrender requests from 17 ship commanders. Their crews are changing. They don't want to fight anymore. The Hegemark studied the display with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. What she saw now was something entirely new, not conquest, but evolution by force. The humans weren't simply defeating the galactic fleet. They were demonstrating that the concept of separate species was an obsolete limitation. Signal all remaining ships, she commanded. Prepare for Omega Protocol. Every officer on the bridge turned to stare at her in shock. Omega Protocol was the Council's final sanction, the complete sterilization of an entire star system. Through coordinated singularity bombardment, it had been used only twice in galactic history, both times to prevent the spread of universe-ending threats. Ma'am, Corvix 9's voice cracked. Omega Protocol will destroy Sol system completely. Every planet, every moon, every trace of matter will be compressed into a single point. The humans will be eliminated, but so will we. Better extinction than assimilation, the Hegemark replied coldly. Signal the fleet. All ships will overload their stellar compression cores simultaneously. The resulting gravitational cascade will create a permanent black hole where Sol system now exists. But as the order was transmitted, something unexpected happened. The human fleet stopped its advance, sir, the sensor officer reported, his voice distorted by partial transformation. They're withdrawing. All human vessels are moving away from our position. On the main display, Hierarch Kellen's image reappeared. His modified features showed what might have been disappointment, but when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of inevitable destiny. We anticipated this response, he said calmly. Your species' tendency toward mutual destruction rather than adaptation. It's one of the reasons you've stagnated for millennia while we've evolved beyond your comprehensio. And the tactical display updated, showing something that made the Hegemark's ancient heart stop beating. The quarantine barrier, the exotic matter construct that was supposed to trap the humans in Sol system, had been turned inside out. Instead of preventing escape, it was now preventing entry. You see, Kellen continued, we never intended to leave Sol system. We've been working for 50 years to perfect our isolation. The barrier you built to cage us has become our shield against your primitive aggression. Volcara Prime realized the truth with crystalline clarity. You've been planning this since the quarantine was announced. You wanted us to attack. Of course, Kellen smiled with features that were no longer entirely human. How else could we harvest the genetic material and technological knowledge of every major galactic species? You brought us samples of 4,000 different evolutionary paths, and we've integrated the best of all of them. The stellar compression cores of the remaining galactic ships began to reach critical overload, their containment field straining against forces that could ignite stars. But as they approached the cascade point, the human fleet's response was swift and decisive. Beams of crystallized time struck each ship's core simultaneously, freezing the overload process at the moment before detonation. The weapons existed in temporal superposition, creating a state where the cores were simultaneously about to explode and completely stable. "Your Omega protocol has been neutralized," Kellern announced. "Your ships are now temporally locked. You cannot advance, you cannot retreat, and you cannot self-destruct. You can only observe as we complete our evolution through the observation ports." The galactic fleet could see the Sol system transforming. Earth itself was changing, its surface becoming a patchwork of biomechanical constructs that pulsed with the rhythm of a vast intelligence. The moon had been converted into a computational matrix, its Maria filled with processing nodes that calculated the futures of entire civilizations. "We are no longer human," Kellern said, his voice now carrying harmonics from hundreds of different species. "We are what you forced us to become, a fusion of every evolutionary path in the galaxy, refined through isolation and necessity. We are the next stage of galactic civilization." The Hegemark found herself struggling to speak as her own vocal cords began to adapt to new harmonic frequencies. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Kellern replied simply. "You have already given us everything we need. Your knowledge, your technology, your genetic templates, all absorbed and integrated. Now you will serve as witnesses to what we have become." The temporal locks holding the galactic ships began to shift, preparing to release them back into normal spacetime. But as they did, each ship's crew found themselves fundamentally changed. They retained their memories and personalities, but their understanding of the universe had been expanded beyond the limitations of their original species. "Return to your worlds," Kellern commanded. "Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that the age of primitive separation is ending. We are coming to bring evolution to the galaxy, one species at a time." 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy had changed in ways that defied every principle of political science and evolutionary biology. The Hegemark sat in her private chambers aboard the council station, studying reports that read like science fiction rather than intelligence briefings. "The Andromedan colonies have begun voluntary integration," Admiral Corvix 9 reported, his voice carrying new harmonic overtones that marked his partial transformation. "They're requesting human assistance with their genetic adaptation programs." The changes had begun within days of the fleet's return to council space. Crew members who had been exposed to human conversion signals found themselves possessing knowledge and capabilities that exceeded their species' natural limitations. Rather than viewing this as contamination, many had embraced it as evolution. "The Krillian Empire has opened formal diplomatic relations with Sol System," the Admiral continued. "They're offering to exchange genetic templates in return for technological assistance." Volcara Prime nodded warily. She had watched her carefully ordered galaxy transform into something chaotic and beautiful, driven by a species that no longer saw genetic boundaries as insurmountable barriers. The humans had demonstrated that evolution was not a slow, natural process, but something that could be directed and accelerated through intelligent design. "And the resistance movements, diminishing daily," Corvix 9 replied. "The coalition of pure species lost their primary funding when the Ethereal Banking Consortium discovered that enhanced intelligence makes for better investment decisions. Even the most conservative species are beginning to see the advantages of controlled evolution." Through the station's observation dome, a new sight had become commonplace. Ships that blended the design philosophies of dozens of different species, their crews working together with an efficiency that had been impossible. When each species was locked into its own evolutionary limitations, the galaxy was becoming something unprecedented, a truly unified civilization. "The humans have established embassy stations in 12 systems," the Admiral continued. "But they're not traditional diplomatic outposts. They're offering what they call evolutionary consultation services. Species can choose their own path of development, with human assistance to overcome genetic and technological barriers." The Hegemark laughed, a sound that carried frequencies her species had never produced before. "They're not conquering the galaxy. They're teaching it to conquer itself." A new transmission arrived from Sol System, and Hierarch Kellern's image appeared on the display. His features had continued to evolve, incorporating aspects of every species that had joined the collective. He looked simultaneously alien and familiar, a living symbol of what the galaxy was becoming. Hegemark, he said, his voice now a harmony of hundreds of different vocal patterns. I'm pleased to report that the Terran Collective has achieved full integration with our local space. Earth, Mars, Venus, and the outer colonies are now functioning as a single organism dedicated to conscious evolution and your intentions toward the rest of the galaxy, she asked. Kellen's expression showed what might have been amusement. We have no intentions beyond offering choice. Species that wish to remain as they are can do so. Those that wish to evolve beyond their current limitations can request our assistance. The age of forced uniformity is ending, and if some species choose to resist, then they will become museums, Kellen replied simply. Living examples of what the galaxy once was, preserved for future study. We have no interest in forcing evolution on those who prefer stagnation. The Hegemark studied the transformed human carefully in the background of the transmission. She could see the bridges of dozens of different ships, their crews working together with seamless coordination. Vorthic warriors stood beside human engineers, their enhanced nervous systems allowing them to process information at superhuman speeds. Ethereal administrators worked with Krillian biologists, their combined intelligence creating solutions that neither species could have achieved alone. The quarantine barrier around Sol system, she asked, will it remain? It serves a different purpose now, Kellen explained. Not a cage, but a laboratory. We're using the isolated space to develop new forms of existence that might not be stable in the broader galaxy. When we're ready, we'll share our discoveries with those who are prepared to receive them. As the transmission ended, Volcara Prime found herself contemplating the future of a galaxy that no longer followed the rules she had spent millennia learning to navigate. The humans had done something unprecedented. They had turned their punishment into their greatest advantage, using enforced isolation to achieve evolutionary transcendence. Admiral, she said quietly, prepare a formal request to Sol System. I want to discuss consultation services. Corvix 9's modified features showed. Surprise, ma'am. Look at what they've accomplished. She gestured toward the observation dome, where mixed species crews worked with unprecedented efficiency. They took our greatest punishment and turned it into their greatest triumph. They forced us to confront the limitations of our own evolution by demonstrating what becomes possible. When those limitations are transcended, the Admiral nodded slowly. The crew members who were partially transformed report cognitive abilities that exceed their original specifications by several orders of magnitude. They're solving problems that would have taken our best scientists decades to understand, and they're still themselves, the Hegemark added, enhanced, but not replaced. The humans didn't destroy the species they encountered, they elevated them. A new alarm chimed softly, indicating an incoming priority transmission. The display activated to show Captain Thylex 7, calling from the bridge of her rebuilt destroyer. Her features showed the subtle signs of enhancement neural pathways that glowed faintly beneath translucent skin, eyes that saw across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Hegemark, she reported, her voice carrying new harmonics of excitement. We've just received word from the Outer Rim. The Zephyrian hive mind has made contact with a human embassy ship. They're requesting full integration protocols. Volcara Prime smiled with an expression that her species had never possessed before. Enhancement. And so it begins. Signal all council representatives. Inform them that the age of species isolation is officially ended. We're entering a new era of conscious evolution. As she spoke, more ships appeared on the tactical display vessels from dozens of different worlds, all heading toward human embassy stations scattered throughout the galaxy. The quarantine that was meant to contain humanity's violence had instead become the crucible for their transformation into something greater than any single species could achieve alone. They were right, she murmured, watching the galaxy reshape itself around principles of voluntary evolution and conscious enhancement. We did make them into what we feared most, but in doing so, we gave them the wisdom to offer us something we never knew we needed, the chance to become more than we ever imagined possible. The stars outside the observation dome pulsed with new energies as enhanced civilizations began reshaping reality itself, guided by the collective wisdom of species that had chosen unity over separation. The humans had won their freedom not through conquest, but by proving that evolution's greatest leaps come not from comfort, but from the pressure of impossible circumstances. In the end, they had turned their cage into a cocoon, emerging not as the violent species the galaxy had feared, but as the architects of its transformation. The forbidden zone around Sol had become the galaxy's new center, not of power, but of possibility, and across the void, other species watched and learned, preparing to take their own leaps into an uncertain but infinitely promising future where the boundaries between self and other, human and alien, evolved and primitive, became nothing more than choices waiting to be made.